Chapter 9 Quaker Talk. The man who looks like God himself is Jebediah Brewster, owner of the house. He's got a long, flowing white beard, piercing blue eyes, and a booming voice that rattles the china when he bellows, "Hello!" A voice that freezes my brain and makes it hard to answer simple questions like, "What be thy name, son?" and "Where be thy home?" Quaker Talk. The young scallywag calls himself Homer and says he's from a place called Smelt, says Mrs. Bean, weighing in. The only truthful part of him is the part that's hungry. Smelt, eh? Very interesting, Mr. Brewster responds in his kindly way. All God's children are from somewhere. The precise location matters not. Thee be welcome in this house, Homer, whoever thee be, and whatever has brought thee here. Mr. Brewster sits down at the table, adjusts his black sleeves, and announces that he will have a glass of cold water, if Mrs. Bean will be so kind as to oblige. He thanks her, takes the glass in both hands, and drinks it in 3 long gulps. His big throat moves under his beard, and you can hear the water going down, like it was leaking out of an old hand pump. The finest spring water, he announces, dabbing delicately at his beard with a linen napkin. That's what drew me to this particular location. Clear, cold spring water, steeped in the best minerals. It keeps the guts healthy and purifies the blood. I intended to bottle it as an elixir and sell it by the drop, but in digging out the spring we encountered gemstones, and that became my business. Just one of the Lord's many surprises. Mr. Brewster then folds his long-fingered hands like he's praying and studies me for a while, as if he's looking at my soul, if I got one, and finds it wanting. Makes me fit to fidget, being studied like that, but I manage to hold still, because both of 'em are waiting for me to tell a lie. I can sense that much. Does thee know much about gemstones, Homer? Mr. Brewster asks, sweet as can be. Something in me wants to say my third cousin Curtis McTavish has been trading gems for his whole life, and recently come into possession of the world's largest ruby that he got off the widow of Blackbeard the pirate, but that the ruby is cursed. Ever since he got the ruby, poor McTavish lives in fear. He's barricaded himself inside his own dungeon and believes that the ruby speaks to him in the ghostly voices of all it has cursed. Of course, I don't have a cousin named Curtis McTavish, or any cousin I'm aware of, and I clamp my jaw shut until the urge passes. He's gone quiet, Mrs. Bean observes suspiciously. Maybe it was starving made him talk so. Mr. Brewster takes a deep breath and nods to himself, as if satisfied. Homer Figg, he announces. Thee may be an innocent stranger, or thee may be a spy sent by those who oppose us. But one thing is clear to me. God has a hand in this, and he would not have us turn away a hungry child. Mrs. Bean smiles at me and shrugs. I get the idea that nothing Mr. Brewster does surprises her. Come along, son, he says, standing up, and thee will be shown the secret of Brewster Mines. The boy needs a bath, Mrs. Bean points out. I doubt he's had a bath this year, and maybe last year too. After he surveys the mine, says Mr. Brewster, clamping his hand on my shoulder. After he's seen our amazing mine, thee can scrub him until he bleeds. I'm hoping that's just more Quaker talk, but Mrs. Bean has a soapy kind of gleam in her eye. Before I have time to make plans for escape, Mr. Brewster is marching me out the door and into the long grass. We're going uphill, away from the big house, away from the warm kitchen, and the sky is so thin and cool and blue it makes me feel a little out of breath somehow. Pretty soon we come to a path, worn into ruts by wagon wheels, and then to a set of rusty iron rails hammered into the hillside. We follow the rails. From around the bend comes the gentle murmur of flowing water, but sound must be tricky in these hills because I never do see the water. All the while, Mr. Brewster's big voice never stops booming, and it comes to me that he couldn't keep a secret even if it killed him, because secrets are related to lies, and I doubt Mr. Brewster ever lied in his whole life. Which reminds me of my brother, Harold, who is probably halfway to the war by now, and worrying about that makes it hard to concentrate on all the things Mr. Brewster is saying about gemstones and mines, and why God has put us on earth and how he tests us. So I searched for healing water and instead found the rainbow, he's saying. Not a pot of gold exactly, but a vast deposit of tourmaline, which comes in all the colors of the rainbow. Tourmaline. Sounds like a pirate name to me. Must be I got pirates on the brain for some reason. But Mr. Brewster explains that tourmaline is a gemstone used in costume jewelry. When polished, it shines like diamonds or rubies or emeralds, depending on how it's cut. Tourmaline brought me great wealth, he says. It did not bring me wisdom or show me the path. It was God who provided wisdom, and Frederick Douglass who showed me the path. And Frederick Douglass, side note here, Frederick Douglass was a famous abolitionist of the time. He was also fighting against slavery. Before he can explain, we come upon the mine itself. I've been expecting a proper tunnel cut into the side of the mountain, like I've seen in storybooks, but Mr. Brewster's mine is more like a big pit in the ground. We're looking down on some rusty tin roofs and a bunch of rickety-looking shacks where the miners work, prying hunks of rock from the ground and cutting out the raw gemstone. Except there are no miners working. There's no one at all. Mr. Brewster guides me down a narrow little pathway into the empty pit. This is the secret of Brewster Mines, he announces quite happily. We ceased production 2 years ago, when the war started. But why is that a secret? I ask. Because the mine remains active, he says mysteriously. It is convenient if the world assumes that the activity is related to mining. Folks think we provide lead and copper to the Union Army. That is not true, and I pray for forgiveness for letting it stand without correction, because my untruthfulness is in the service of a greater good. For once in my life, I keep my mouth shut and wait for him to tell me whatever it is he wants to say. I assume he's going to confess there are fugitive slaves hid in the mines somewhere, like Smelt said, but I'm not supposed to know that, so I got to be ready to act surprised when it comes out. Only it don't come out. Not exactly. Mr. Brewster drapes his long arm over my shoulders and holds on, like he expects me to bolt any second. He lowers his big voice to a ragged whisper. Ebenezer Smelt is well known in these parts, he confides. Mr. Smelt is often found in the company of William Mullins, better known as Stink. I mention this because thee told Mrs. Bean thee hailed from a place called Smelt. To my knowledge, no such place exists. So I must assume thee are in league with the murderous Mr. Smelt and his evil associate. I started out keeping my mouth shut on purpose, but Jebediah Brewster has knocked the words right out of me.